Hello and welcome to the Tricky Talks podcast. We are back. The World Cup is back. And on today's show, we have the first in a series of roundtable discussions with various guests where we chat about anything and everything to do with NFFC. Before I introduce today's special guests, Kate is here. How are you, Kate?
I'm good, yeah. It's all happening, isn't it? I can vaguely hear the World Cup coming through the wall from next door and the wall where my boys are sat watching it. So yeah, it feels a bit like football's back.
It does. Kate and I are actually delighted to welcome to the show Greg and Richard from the Talking Reds podcasts. Hello, chaps, and welcome. Greg, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much for the invite. Really nice to be on your pod. Been watching as you guys have got up and running and finished your first year and done really well and made a really good kind of impression on the fan base and other pods as well. So well done to you. And yeah, just again, really happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very kind words, Greg. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And Richard, welcome to you as well, because all the way from Oklahoma, I believe.
That is right. The exciting place that is Norman, Oklahoma, everyone's destination place, Yeah, no, this is excellent. I'm so excited to talk with you guys. Really, really grateful. I echo what Greg said as well. I mean, you guys have done a great job with your pod, and what a baptism by fire for your first year in a podcast to have that kind of season to have to talk about. But yeah, exciting nonetheless, right? That's the key for being a Forest fan. There's undulations, ebbs and flows, right? Emotionally and mentally. So appreciate you guys letting us come on. It's exciting.
Yeah, that's all right. We're just glad to be part of the Forest podcast family, aren't we, Kate? Like you say, first year, and we've thoroughly enjoyed it, haven't we?
Yeah, we are indeed. It's great. I'm excited to have you guys here.
Right, to the format of today's show: 4 hosts, 4 Forest topics, 10 minutes each, strict time frame. Each of us have picked our own Forest topic to talk about. We do know what each one has chosen. And as you are our guests, Greg, we're going to kick off with your topic, please. 10 minutes are on the clock. So what would you like to talk about today?
Well, 10 minutes on the clock. I've actually got my phone ready now because we don't have timers. So it's a good idea when you come up with the timer. So I'll start it now. And it's to ask the question, has Vitor Pereira's biggest challenge now shifted from survival to expectation? So Vitor Pereira came in. We know the job that he had. It was pretty simple. It was steady the ship after the turbulence of all those managers and the injuries that had started to rack up a little bit. And so maybe our expectations last season were, listen, let's just stay up. Let's try and get as far as we can in Europe. But the priority was staying in the Premier League. He managed to do that. And, with a couple of games to spare, some might say actually he did it pretty well. And we got to the semi-final of the Europa League, which I think was fantastic. I think had Sean Dyche stayed in role, my own opinion is I don't quite think we'd have got that far. I think we might have gone out to Fenerbahce and all that kind of stuff. So we're now turning the page, and as much as there's been some so-called rumour about interest from Saudi in Vitor Pereira, I'm pretty confident he'll be our manager going into the new season. So now the question is, has the expectation changed from us being just looking to survive to now looking to really make more of an impact again in the Premier League? Thinking about the fact there's 3 new teams coming up. One of them's already changed their manager. Kieran McKenna's gone from Ipswich. We've got teams like Brighton and Bournemouth and Crystal Palace and Sunderland that are going to be in Europe, and we know about managing the challenges of squads in Europe. They're going to have that this time. Thursday, Sunday football. United back in Europe as well. So there's a lot of teams playing in Europe. There's a lot of teams. There's 3 teams coming up, as I should say. And Forest now have an opportunity, I think. And so are the expectations in the fans now lifted? And is Vitor Pereira going to be able to manage that expectation? Kate, what do you think?
I think this is the absolute joy of being a football fan, isn't it? Like, just rewind a few weeks and we're all like, please let us stay up, please let us stay up, please let Spurs lose, let's just get a point here, a point will do. And now, like, we've literally had, a couple of weeks to go, and now we're all like, right, we're going to win a domestic trophy, we're going to qualify for Europe by finishing top 6 in the league. this is our season, it's going to happen. And yet you just know that it's Nottingham Forest, isn't it? It's not going to look like that. When that first ball gets kicked in August, it's all going to start to dawn on us that actually, yeah, we support Nottingham Forest. I absolutely echo what you say about Pereira. I do think he'll be manager at the beginning of the season, and I think that he absolutely should be. I think he's earned that, and I have to say that I didn't immediately warm to him. I think it's fair to say, but I think he's done a good job, and I think he should be given the opportunity to get some success in his own right, I think.
But are the fans going to be patient enough though? Because as I just said, we're a brutal bunch, and everyone knows that being in the Premier League is difficult. So Simon, you want to come in. Are the fans going to be patient enough? And is that expectation now realistic?
I think the fans are going to be patient enough. I wonder whether the owner is going to be patient enough. And we're going to talk about Marinakis later on, but we know how trigger happy he can be at times. And I think the start of the season is going to be really, really important in terms of the direction of how that season's going to go. Because you mentioned, Greg, all the likes of Palace, Sunderland, Bournemouth, they're all in Europe, and they'll find it really hard. Like we have found out ourselves, you've got the 3 teams coming up who, on paper, you think Forest are going to be arguably better than them. So the expectation is there to finish at a reasonably high position. I say high; it's all relative. 10th is high for us, and the start. So if they get off to a good start next season, then they're going to be well on track to fulfil that ambition. If they have a bad start, then the pressure is going to be on Pereira, and I'm not sure whether Marinakis has got the patience to ride through any particular difficult times at the beginning of the season. So that for me is going to be the key. Richard?
Yeah, I mean, what about you, Richard? I mean, we've spoken a lot on our pod about stability and so on. It's not so much the question about being stable. It's more about, I guess, the shift from that survival that we knew we had to achieve to now making sure we break that top 10. I mean, what does success look like for Forest next season, Rich?
I mean, I think it depends a lot on, I was going to jump in real quick before I answer that question in relation to the codependency on who we're going to actually put on the pitch, because that's such a lingering question. Anderson seems like an obvious exit, right, with everything that's going on. But hey, if they don't reach that 125 to 130 million mark, it seems, then he may not go anywhere. I mean, you have him and you have Gibbs White back and you have that whole core. I mean, you can conceivably say from a quality standpoint, from a talent standpoint, where they ended from a form standpoint, like Kate kind of talked about just as a team. But those individual players, and we'll get on to Morgan here in a minute, but I think you put all that together, I think the expectations will be back in Europe. I think you you finish in European spots, right? Or you do win a domestic cup to put yourself in contention into a European tournament. So I do think that's feasible, because I think all the ingredients are there. You can point to a variety of different things clearly from last season as to what may be the primary root cause. I think it's a collective of things, right? It's not just any one thing, but I think, goal scoring was a problem, and we seem to solve that problem towards the end of the season to a degree. We can always get better at that. We can always see that ratchet up, if you will. But I think there's going to be so much, because his time at Wolves, that was a key problem, right? When he really when the team kind of sunk and it wasn't performing at the levels that they had hoped to perform, or at least staying in that relevancy in terms of not being in the survival mode constantly throughout the season, it was because he lost key talent and they didn't replace them with anyone really that could give you a lot of confidence. So I think it's even more the case here, because you've got people sniffing around Morgan and Elliott and probably even other players as well that are depth pieces that help, even if they're not starters. So yeah, it's all it's all codependent on how that all functions again. Although I am excited, because I think he's made a huge difference for those younger players in terms of helping them build that confidence and feel like they have a part to play next season more so. And now they've been battle tested a little bit in the Premier League, so they'll be better ready for that, I think, next season than they were this season.
And Kate, you mentioned you didn't quite warm to him at first, but would you agree that he's got charisma and he's got personality, and actually his ability to connect with the fans has maybe caught you by surprise?
he's coming into his own. I found it really difficult to start with because I felt he was a little bit moany at times, and I don't subscribe to that. I'm a very harsh critic. You know, you're here to do a job. I don't want to hear, you know, about all the problems. I just want to see the results, and ultimately that's what he did. And I think as the results came, the personality grew, which, you know, is good. And we like that as fans. You know, we're a very loyal fan base, and we have this idea of the Forest family. So we do need that from a manager. So and I do believe that he is now offering us that, which is good. My major concern with Pereira is historically he doesn't seem to stay anywhere for long. Now, is that about the fact that he has a temporary effect in what he does, and therefore once that runs out, he gets sacked? Or is it that that's just how he rolls, that he doesn't like to stay anywhere for too long? You know, and I suppose time will tell. You know, one thing leads to the other. If the results dry up, there's no question Marinakis will pull the plug. I wasn't 100% convinced that he wouldn't go in for silver this summer anyway, but I do think it's looking less likely that that's going to happen now. So for me, as much as I fully expect him to be our manager at the beginning of the season, if I'm honest, I'd be surprised if he is at the end.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. He might have a record where he doesn't stay in jobs that long, but I kind of feel like that's the culture in football these days. And we're the club that, with our owner, we should know better than anyone that a run of poor results and you're going to lose your job. So out of time on my segment, but just flipping it back to say that, is his biggest challenge now managing expectation rather than survival? Well, I bloody hope so. Because I don't want to be managing survival next season. I want to be managing expectation. You know, going back a year before when we had the season of seasons and we were in the top three for most of it, we ended up finishing seventh, which we'd have all bitten your hand off for at the start of that season. My gut feeling is that, you know, give him a pre-season, let him have expectations in himself and the players, and the rest will follow suit.
Great topic to start off with, Greg. Excellent conversation, and I'm sure that's an argument that will be going on for all season until we either do well in the league and qualify for Europe, as Richard said, or not, or he gets sacked. But let's move on to your topic then, Richard. What would you like to discuss today? I know you've got a particular player in mind.
Yeah, I think anybody who watches our pod knows my affinity for Morgan Gibbs-White. I had a little moment of doubt right in that first half of the season. Thought maybe his head was turned. But yeah, can we allow Morgan Gibbs-White to leave? And if he does, what do we do? That's the question, right? I mean, there's lots of pontification potentially on that, but it's not an easy thing to do, obviously, given what his stature is. But yeah, go ahead, Simon, jump in. I got some stats I want to share with you that just kind of emphasize why he's important, but go ahead.
Yeah, we had this similar conversation on our pod a couple of weeks ago, and I asked the guys on the spot who they thought out of Gibbs, White and Anderson was more important to Forest, and unanimously we all said Gibbs White, and he's the talisman, he's the player that makes them tick. He's essentially one of the biggest reasons why they survived in the Premier League this season, and arguably he'd be harder to replace in that lineup than somebody like Anderson. So for me, it's a no-brainer. You've got to keep him. I think his Forest season partly depends on whether he's in the starting lineup or not. Obviously, you don't know what recruitment they will do if somebody like Gibbs White was to leave, but if he does, he's going to be very, very hard to replace, I think, and arguably more difficult than Anderson. So for me, they cannot afford to let him go by any means. And you think the nightmare scenario would, of course, be that they sell Anderson and Gibbs White. I don't think that would happen. I think the Anderson sale probably would go, and I'm sure Gibbs White will stay at this moment in time.
I'll quickly jump in and say that I think that to lose Gibbs White alongside Anderson would cause the meltdown and meltdowns. I don't think that we as a fan base could quite handle that. I don't know. I said this on our pod. I'll say it again here. I don't know when Marinakis convinced Morgan to sign that contract last season, when he looked like he was going to Spurs. I wondered then, and I wonder now, if there was some kind of agreement between the two that says, look, give me another year. I'll give you good money, and let's look at it again in a year's time. on the basis that we were going to be challenging for the Europa League. We might have got to the Champions League, but that's kind of in the back of my mind now, because it does look like Elliot Anderson's going to go to Manchester City. I'm 99% sure that he will make that transfer. They'll come back, they'll make a bid, they'll make a decision, they'll make an agreement. It will happen. And actually it should happen early, because it's good for the club, because we need to get our ducks in a row as well when it comes to recruitment. If we were to look at Morgan leaving as well, you know, if Arsenal come in, it's going to be very hard for us to say to Morgan, you can't go to Arsenal. I mean, PSG were mentioned. I don't see that happening. But, you know, if it did, I mean, he's not going to stay at Forest. So then you are looking at both of your real top level star players. And I know we've got others like Nico and so on that we love and adore. But, you know, they're the heartbeat of the side. You know, Elliot is a world-class midfielder. He's going to show that in the World Cup. I wish Morgan was there, because I think he deserves to be there. But can we afford to let him go? The answer is no. But do we get a choice in that matter? Potentially not, after the season that he had. The way he finished it, you know, it's going to attract. If Morgan Rogers goes from Villa, there's talk that you guys have heard and everyone's heard that he's on their list to go in and replace Morgan Rogers. So, you know, the window hasn't even opened yet officially, by the way. This deal's happening and it doesn't even open for another 4 days. So there's stuff happening before the window's even open. It's going to go crazy. You've got a World Cup going on. Yeah, if I was a betting man, I'd say that Gibbs White is still a Forest player come the start of the next season. Elliot Anderson, unfortunately, won't be.
I think I would absolutely agree with that. I think that Marinakis won't let them both go. And for me, if Morgan goes, Anderson stays, and vice versa. And we are in that position where we don't need to sell. And Marinakis he's a businessman. More than anything, he's a businessman. So they might say, but we really, really want to go, and for our career and all this, that, and the other. But that is going to fall on deaf ears when it comes to our owner, I believe. So I, like you, think Anderson will go. I think he will go to Man City. I think they will meet the demands, and it will be the record transfer that, you know, Marinakis wants it to be. And I think he will go, and I think Morgan will stay. And I can cope with that. You know, having Anderson has been amazing. I wish we could keep him, but football doesn't work like that. Especially not when you're Nottingham Forest. I wish him all the luck. Morgan's different. For me, I'd come to terms with the idea of Morgan going at the end of last season. I had, and I was thinking more along the lines of who's going to come in, who's going to be our new superstar. But he didn't go. He stayed, and it was by far the most important signing that we made last season. He has absolutely kept us up. There's anybody that watches Forest on a regular basis knows that Morgan Gibbs-White has had a huge amount to do with the fact that we remain a Premier League club. And I think I said this on our podcast, what he has the opportunity to do is become a legend at Nottingham Forest. And I really, really hope that he does, because, you know, we've already touched on it when we were talking about managers. Loyalty in football just doesn't exist at the moment. But for Morgan Gibbs-White, he could be that exception. And he, in the same way that he led us to Europe, kept us up this season, you know, he would be instrumental in any success that we have. And Marinakis is clearly invested in him. We are clearly invested in him as fans. So I hope very much that he stays willingly. I feel like he loves it here. I do think he's proved that this season. You know, there were a lot of doubters at the beginning, but I do think he's proved that. Funnily enough, PSG bothered me more than Arsenal. I thought, gosh, that is everything, isn't it? Going to PSG.
Yeah, Brittany would love that as well.
Yeah, it's a country. But if Anderson goes, I can't see any way that Marinakis will.
No, I was going to echo the same thing. Marinakis is a good businessman, and a transfer of that magnitude will have to go through Marinakis. And there's no way he will sanction both players to be sold in the same transfer window. because he doesn't make those kind of bad business decisions. And let's face it, it would be a bad decision. Greg's already alluded to the fact the fan base would have an absolute meltdown. And I don't think Marinakis would want that either. So I'm convinced that, like Greg said, Anderson will probably go. There is an argument to say sooner rather than later is better for Forest, given the time they need to recruit subsequently. But the flip side of that is his value going to increase during and after the World Cup? So there's that to consider. But to go back to Richard's original question, I think Morgan Gibbs-White will feel settled here, doesn't he? You know that the way he interacts with the fans, the way he gets emotional in his post-match interviews, he's got a real affinity with the club. So I don't think he would be wanting to necessarily push a move either. So I feel as though fairly confident that Gibbs-White will stay at least for now.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in because I think Richard's going with a couple of technical issues and this is his question. But I'll just quickly add that I think what you guys were saying as well, you know, he can build so much by staying at Forest. He can make it his club. You know, he can be the main man for not just the next season, but for the next 5 seasons. If he goes to an Arsenal or the like, you know, yeah, okay, he'll go to a club with trophy ambitions. And God, I sound stupid when I say what player wants to turn that down. But sometimes footballers want more than that. They want that adulation that he is the main man at Forest. He's the one that all the fans really kind of look to. And yeah, he has to stay in my eyes. I think Richard's back, and I think you've got some stats and facts for us before your minute closes.
Look, at the end of the day, this is only going to probably support what we know from an eye test standpoint, right? So it's probably not worth going through all of them. But I would say the one thing that is clear and evident is the fact that he's 37% of all of our goal contributions. I mean, you and the uniqueness of who he is as a player and what he does, as well as what Elliott does, I think makes it really hard to just replicate and just plug and play with somebody else, right? And you take into account the levels of things like leadership. I mean, look at the way it's emblazoned in my mind that match, and I can't remember which one it was, but Hutch was trying to, you know, pump some corners in, and he kept putting him out of bounds, and he just looked defeated. And you had Morgan go over there and say, hold on to the crowd. And then, you know, kind of buoy him up and G him up and trying to get him feeling better about himself. And I think that's the shift here. And to Kate's point, I think he recognizes I could become a squad player very quickly in the same manner that Eze kind of did to a degree at Arsenal this year, the way that Grealish eventually did when he started to kind of descend in terms of his effectiveness with Man City. So you just don't want a player with his caliber and his age to just become a number, because he can be so much more than that. And I think he sees it. We're right there again. The bulk of the squad that got us to 7th is still here, and they've only gotten better, and they've only, I think, improved from a mentality and a standpoint by virtue of going through what we went through last season, right? Having touched that European experience and being disappointed. And so they're going to have a hunger and a fight for it as well. And so anyway, I absolutely love him. He can't go anywhere. I'm sure Marinakis is going to pump up the weekly wage. I bet you he gets him to that 150K or more per week, right? Just to keep him here, make him that legend that Kate, you mentioned he can be. I think that's a great statement. He can literally be, you know, in the halls of Forest legends, which again, as we all recognize, is a legendary club. It's a historical club, and he deserves to be a part of that. And so I think he's on the precipice now, right, with some things that have already happened, but I think he'll definitely throw himself into that mix. But yeah, I mean, his GCA stats are off the chart. He was one of the best in the league, obviously from a goal scoring standpoint, from an Englishman, right? And just there's so much about his game that, you know, you take that out, the creativity, you create a massive creativity deficit and talent deficit in our squad. So anyway, love him. He will stay. I believe it. I think he'll push on and continue with us for years to come.
Excellent. Thanks, Richard. So Morgan, you've heard it from all the 4 of us. We want you to stay. I know you're watching, Morgan, so listen to us.
There you go.
Right. Moving on then, Kate, your topic. What are you going to talk about today, please?
That we've got going on here, it makes us look like we really know what we're doing. If you notice, we've kind of gone from manager to the connotations of the players, and now we're going from contracts to Evangelos Marinakis. Okay,
amazing.
the big Greek,
big
our owner. And what I I had this conversation in the car driving to Herning, because we stayed in Copenhagen, so we had a 3-hour drive from Copenhagen to Herning on the match day, and it was a really interesting conversation. My question to you is, Evangelos Marinakis, is he a hero or is he a villain? So I'll put out there. So 2017, he purchased our club and made a very bold statement that we would qualify for Europe within 5 years, and obviously started talking about the stadium redevelopment. So as we all know, we got promoted to the Premier League in 2022, and we did qualify for Europe last year. So, you know, when you look at it like that, he's absolutely a hero. He's brought Forest back to where we've all believed that we belong for a very, very long time. However, the flip side of that is in 2024, he got a 5-game ban for spitting at the officials after we lost to Fulham. There is the infamous going on the pitch after the Leicester game and, you know, having words with Nuno. And a lot of people say that is where that relationship really started to break down. And, you know, we know what came after that. We've got the tweet about the officials, which somehow got into the public domain. We've got, I think when we went on the tour last weekend, did they say it was 5 TVs he's broken this season already?
Well, 5 TVs in his time at Forest, not in one season.
Oh, was it not in one season? So, you know, it does beg the question, you know, with having Marinakis as your manager, the controversies do come and the consequences of those. You know, we get onto the Edu thing as well. That's got to be in there. So I will go to Richard first. For you, Evangelos Marinakis, hero or villain?
Oh, hero. Come on. Yeah. I mean, yeah, look, stylistically, he may not be everyone's cup of tea, as it were. So I understand that very much. I think, you know, Simon's an NFL fan. There's some pretty interesting personalities in the NFL ownership, you know, ranks as well. And some that are very involved and micromanage everything and sort of tend to be, you know, impossible to kind of separate from business to the actual operations side and the development side of teams and so forth. And so, you know, he clearly loves Forest. I mean, I think he's spoken about his affinity for the club in terms of what they've been and what he wanted to bring back to them, which, like you just touched on, Kate, he did that very well in a much more rapid way than we thought, right? But I do think probably on the periphery, there may be a few Forest fans who get tired of maybe some of the antics and some of the things that you mentioned in terms of how he operates. You know, he knows what he likes and he's going to hold firm. We're seeing that in living color right now with the negotiations with Man City as it relates to Anderson, which I think is a good thing because I think he's doing it for the benefit of the club. But yeah, on the outside world, I'd say probably everybody on social sense, Forest fans probably think he's a villain because they just perpetually talk about him, right? He's a galvanizing, polarizing figure in world football today. And so, yeah, for me personally, he's a hero. I understand the concept of the villain idea because, you know, maybe we call him more of an anti-hero. I'm going to get into what my son likes to talk about with, you know, like anti-heroes, you know, in comic book lore. But yeah, maybe something more like that. But to us, for me, I would say the majority of us probably feel this way. I feel this way. He's a hero.
Greg, 4 managers, still a hero?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
good point.
Richard just touched on it. I mean, it depends on who you ask. If you ask me and any Forest fan, I'm pretty certain that everyone would say he's an absolute hero. If you ask anybody outside the club, then that's where the villain. I mean, I've always referred to him as the pantomime villain because a lot of them kind of like to boo and hiss at him for the antics that he does. And so, you know, when I've actually been invited onto a couple of opposition previews for Spurs and Sunderland last season, the first thing I get asked is about Marinakis. Do you like him and what's he like? And because they're kind of almost transfixed by him. He is a larger than life character. The Palace fans are obsessed with him. He gets under the skin. So in terms of what he's done for Forest, I can live with the 4 managers because we survived. But, you know, he was very quick to address the Postecoglou hiring by sacking him quite quickly. That took cojones because he made that appointment and he stepped up and got rid of him. I wasn't in favour of him sacking Sean Dyche because I was kind of having a bit of a flap at the time. Wasn't a fan of the football, but I was in survival mode. I was convinced, and I still think that Sean Dyche would have kept us in the Premier League, but that's another conversation. But he made a decision, and actually, you know what? He got it right because Vitor came in and we went further in Europe than I think we would have done under Deitch. So he's making big decisions. You know, the TV smashing, I haven't got a problem with that. The demanding nature of him, I haven't got a problem with that whatsoever. The walking onto the pitch, I don't really care about that. He's the owner. He can go on the pitch if he wants. I just see it differently. I really, really do. People like Gary Neville and the outside make a lot of noise. Oh, what's he doing on the pitch? What's he doing on the pitch? It's like, yeah, and in Greece they do a lot of that. It's very, very different there. So you got to understand that his mentality is of a certain nature, and his drive is what has got us into Europe and will get us into Europe again very soon. He set a plan. He said that line, in the end we always win. Okay, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but in the end it kind of does win a lot, you know, when it comes down to it. If you look at his reaction when Olympiacos won the Conference League as well, you know, he's right in the thick of it. He wants the same for Forest. He puts a lot of money into the club and then converts a lot of it into shares. Go and watch our finance episode with Raf and he'll explain all about how Marinakis does that. So you don't go into football ownership to make money. You go into it and you effectively lose a lot of money. So we're very, very lucky that we've got an owner like him that's got ambition, that's got drive, that's got personality, that's got desire to get Forest back to where we belong. I'm old enough to remember the Clough days, as maybe one or two others are as well. And he sees Forest as that club. And a lot of our fan base have had a lot of years in the Championship, and their viewpoint is actually, oh, we're Forest, and actually we're not a big club really at all. Well, actually we are. Forest are a huge club, and Marinakis has reminded us of that.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to echo exactly what Greg said there, Kate, in that the perception of Marinakis is that he's a pantomime villain. He's not a criminal in terms of the way he operates Forest. He's a pantomime villain because he wears his heart on his sleeve. And I think a lot of the things he does, is Greg said as well, you know, it's a legacy of how Greek football operates. I mean, they have the way Greek football is, they have statements in the press slagging off officials and stuff, don't they? Which you wouldn't be able to get away with in this country. Yeah, there are one or two things that you have to question. You know, the spitting is just dirty. The tweet that he sent out, whilst he may have had a very, very valid point, it would have come from him. That sort of tweet wouldn't have gone out unless he signed it off. And you know, the reaction that the football world had to that tweet, even though we all agreed with it, I don't think it did the club any good. So there are a couple of things where you have to think it's a legacy of how Greek football operates, not necessarily how the person Marinakis is. But at the end of the day, he's our chairman, he's our owner, and he'll do what's best for this football club. And a perfect example of that right now is the way he's negotiating Elliot Anderson. He's sticking to his guns. He's not giving in just because it's Man City who are coming flashing their cash. He wants what's best for that Forest, and he won't let Anderson go unless he feels the deal is absolutely right. And that's precisely what you want in an owner, is not to give in to the so-called top six, to stand your ground, do what's right for the football club. And if he decides to sell Elliot Anderson for however much, then we have to back him, don't we? So that's my thoughts on Anderson.
Can I quickly just jump back in for like 10 more seconds? The stuff that might muddy the waters for some Forest fans and those that aren't Forest fans are the accusations in Greece of bribery, of corruption, of other things that he's never been found guilty of, that have never been in front of a court, have been thrown out. But those kind of things carry a bit of baggage. And then when you go to, I think it was a basketball game, and you end up slapping someone around the face in full view and get your T-shirt ripped and that. I mean, it's unconventional to say the least. And you know, we don't endorse that kind of behaviour. But, you know, he is what he is. And I don't think he's ever going to change.
I don't think he is. And for me, that's, you know, you've all described him as a pantomime villain. And I think that's really accurate. The thing that comes with having a pantomime villain as your owner is sometimes your club can be portrayed as a bit of a pantomime. And I do think there were points this season where that was the case. You know, Chelsea talks about it all the time, doesn't she? About, you know, the Mr. Blobby's going to be our next manager. You know, Mr. Bean's going to be our next manager. You know, the coming onto the pitch, that is very pantomime, isn't it? It all is. And I suppose, as you've said, in the end, this season, it was okay because we stayed up, Pereira did his job. It hurt on the night, but we can be proud of a semi-final for our first, go round in Europe for all that time. And ultimately, I think the conclusion that we came to in the car was that if you're going to have an owner that does the kind of things for your club that Marinakis does, then you have to take the rough with the smooth. You have to take the pantomime. You have to take the larger than life. You do have to have those moments sometimes where you think, what are you doing? Stop it. But ultimately, I agree with you all. For me, he's absolutely a hero. And I'm very glad.
Can you imagine him coming onto the pitch wearing a pantomime horse's costume?
Yeah.
I can now.
Yeah. Right. On to the final topic then. We've talked about Forest owner, we've talked about players. We're going to talk more about Forest players, plural now, and specifically those that are currently at the World Cup in the US. You've got Anderson for England, Tyler Bindon and Chris Wood for New Zealand. You've got Sangare for the Ivory Coast and Doy for Switzerland. And you have kind of Angus Gunn for Scotland, albeit we know he's leaving, so perhaps we can leave him out of the conversation. But what are you expecting to see from the Forest guys at the World Cup? Is it an opportunity for some to put themselves in the shop window? Is it an opportunity for some to perhaps think about, well, I really want to make an impression at Forest? Or what are you expecting to see from Forest players? Are you watching anyone in particular? We'll start with you, Richard. Obviously, Anderson's the main focus with him being English, but you're not English. What are you looking for from Forest players at the World Cup?
No, I think some of those that you've listed are pretty cemented in terms of how they functioned in the Premier League and the kind of impact they've had both on Forest as well as the sort of talent that they've showcased within the Premier League sphere, right? I mean, Sangare, we know the history with the injuries, the illness, the multitude of things that prevented him get on the field. But I would suggest that Bindon, for me, is probably the one that has the most to sort of gain from this, just because of he's been kind of languishing and, he's obviously come from, I think he was from LAFC, or he was in that academy, I think, and then he moved over here, and he's obviously gotten signed by Forest, and he's been well known to a degree. I mean, the talent is evident, and I have a cousin who's a Forest fan who lives in Auckland actually, and so he's talked about Tyler Bindon and what they think about him there, and I think he even won an award, a footballing award in relation to New Zealand a couple years ago, and so it's hard to showcase yourself when you're in League One and you're in Championship, probably a little bit more in Championship because you're on ESPN, right? In the US, for example. But ultimately, I think he's the one that I think would be the most likely to show what potential he has. And when he's going up against the kind of talent that he's going to go up against in the World Cup, yeah, some teams aren't going to be talented. They're certainly not as collectively talented as most teams in the Premier League, but there's going to be an uptick in terms of what he's facing because a lot of these players do play in some of the bigger leagues. And so when he has to go against those types of talents, it's going to allow him to, I think, up his game a bit. He's going to learn from the experience and hopefully come back more confident, more energized, more willing to again, show what he's capable of within our training regimen and leading into that, through that preseason, leading into the season. But it'll be interesting to see what they're doing because we're touching on some of these, the Polish lad and the I think there was another one from, was it from Frankfurt that I think we were looking at? Theet, I think, a Belgian player. And so there's these other center backs that are kind of just lingering in the background as being rumored. And so you got to wonder, like, what's the plan? Is he going on another loan? Like, what's the real, opportunity here? Are they potentially going to try to sell him? And so I think for me, everybody else is kind of already a known entity. And we know what Anderson is. We know what Sangare is. We know what Chris Wood is and so on and so forth. So, but I think it's Bindon's time to shine, really.
Yeah, Richard. Thanks, Richard. I agree, Greg, with what Richard says. But my concern there is, in all the prediction leagues I've done for the World Cup and sweepstakes, I've got New Zealand going out in the group stages, so without them progressing to the next phase. So he's only going to have 3 games, isn't he, to impress?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really looking at Bindon and Wood, if I'm honest, for that reason. We know what Wood can do. I hope he comes through unscathed. I hope they have a good tournament. The player that I hope has a fantastic tournament, and he's absolutely certain to have a fantastic tournament, because when he puts on a Switzerland shirt, he always scores. Daniel Doy plays for Switzerland, he scores. And in other news, water is wet, and I'm a Forest fan. So if he has a great tournament, we can sell him. That's kind of what I'm hoping for, because he hasn't got going at Forest. I've not really been impressed with him. Maybe I think he's going to probably retain his value quite well with the Italian teams anyway, for some weird reason. Even though he hasn't had a great season with us, the World Cup would just help to kind of rubber stamp that value. So I hope he has a good tournament. I hope they all have a good tournament. I don't want them to be injured, or I want them to come back healthy, of course. But looking at the games, England are obviously the team that should go furthest. And Elliot Anderson is a world-class midfielder. And for all those Man City and Man United fans that are on X at the moment, bleating about the price and how he's not worth that much money, well, that's because they haven't watched him. Yeah. They haven't really watched him. They'll watch him now. He's bossing and anchoring and manoeuvring and ordering and being the midfield orchestrator that allows Rice to do what he does. The balance in that midfield is the best it's been for England for a long, long time. So he's going to be catapulted. And if we don't sell him before the World Cup and it finishes, maybe someone else will come in and want to pay even more money. You just never know. So that could happen. But look, Sangare stay healthy. Bindon and Wood will go out in the group stage. Dan N'Doye will score probably 6 goals and be the Golden Boot winner because he's playing for Switzerland and he turns it on playing for them. And we'll see what happens after the World Cup in terms of getting him out of the club and transferring.
Yeah, that's a strange one with Dan N'Doye, because we've seen what he can do with Switzerland, and he hasn't translated that into Forest at all. But, if he does have another World Cup, Greg, where he performs really well, would you not want to give him a second chance at Forest? Because we can see it on the international stage. I don't know why he can't do it in the Premier League. Is it the Premier League? Would you not? Are you adamant he needs to be sold, or would you give him a second chance?
I'm being a little bit obtuse. I am being a bit obtuse because Richard and I have been really frustrated with him. Look, if obviously he's a quality player, but it's just for some reason there hasn't been what we wanted from him. And I think maybe the pressure was on because all of a sudden our season changed from being maybe a top 10 side that we thought we would be, with lots of different managers coming in, to then shifting towards a survival battle. And maybe he's not cut out for that kind of challenge. So maybe he comes back and he gets the pre-season with Vitor, and maybe he gets a new lease of life. So look, if he comes back and he's at the club still, then, listen, he'll have my full support. They all will. But so, yeah, I'm being a little bit flippant, a bit obtuse about him, just based on, I've become a little bit fatigued by him. And again, I'm kind of joking around his Switzerland form versus his Forest form, because it does seem a real thing.
It absolutely is a real thing. And in some respects, you stole my answer a little bit there, Greg, because I was going to talk about Dan N'Doye. But what's interesting is that if you think about, so we've mentioned Sangare, because obviously Sangare's in the World Cup, and how he has cemented his place in our squad, and we expect him to go to the World Cup and do his thing. I think that would have been a really different conversation, even just this time last year, because we were waiting, weren't we? We were waiting for Sangare to become the player that we were told he could be. And actually, we felt like we've been waiting too long. And I think, it's great that he's been able to contribute in the way that he has this season. Although he does divide opinion on our podcast, I think, we can all confidently say this has been by far his best season at Nottingham Forest, and I hope his time at the World Cup further cements that, further gives that confidence. But I would say that you do expect Dan N'Doye to do better on the international stage. It's kind of taken for granted that he will, and my hope would be that does inject some confidence, but also perhaps a greater understanding of how we play him, how we coach him, and what, how we get that contribution level up when he pulls on a Forest shirt. I think that's an opportunity for our people, if he's going to stay. Much like you, I wouldn't be particularly devastated if he went, but I also think the World Cup's an opportunity for that. And I think it's an opportunity for us to have a look at some players that we might be less familiar with, and the scouts are less familiar with, because realistically, we're going to have some big shoes to fill, and whether they be Elliot Anderson's, Morgan Gibbs-White's or not, there's a need for something more, isn't there? in terms of, we started off talking about expectation. We also have to be realistic that there is more to add to this squad if we really want to kick on. So for me, that's a massive part of the World Cup. Who's going to be the unexpected star? We need to be looking at the positions that are wanting and seeing if we can find someone that looks like they might fit. And, if that's Dan and Doy, then that's great because he's already ours. But if it's somebody else, it's an opportunity for us to bring that person in.
Final word from you, Richard, because I think my 10 minutes are about to be up.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I just real quick, a couple of things. Firstly, I would say, I know he's under contract, but we recognize even with Callum Wenda, and we'll see what happens with him. When players are just not feeling comfortable in a situation, he could be trying to engineer his way out as well. I mean, there's been some rumors out there about him not being happy with things. And then I think the second part of that is you look for some clues, which aren't always there. And it's not always obvious because we're not actually in the dressing room, nor are we on the training pitch to actually see what's going on and what the conversations are with Vitor. But he didn't seem to feature him much, to be completely candid, even when he came back healthy. So I don't know if it's, Vitor's having a say, which it seems like he might have a little bit of say in terms of the personnel he's going to have. And by virtue of the fact that you see Bakwa and Hutchinson and others kind of getting, I understand Bakwa played more on the right versus playing on the left, like Ndoye was starting to do at one point. But I would say with Callum coming back, you got a healthy Callum, and you've got Morgan sometimes featuring in that left-hand side in a sort of 4-4-2 setup. We know it's fluid. I just don't see how he even gets on the pitch, to be honest with you, because you start to look at the traits that they have. And even though Callum wasn't brilliant last season, he's played in the Premier League and he's shown that he can be impactful in the league. So I would say that for me, agreed with what Greg's saying, the showcasing of him in this tournament allows us to at least recoup what we paid for him, because there's some amortization that's tied to what happened this season, that we've had him for a full season. And I think, frankly, he probably wants to go back to Serie A. He probably feels like that's where his traits are going to be the most impactful and where he can show, feature himself more.
Great way to finish, Richard. Thanks for that. So that's it. Yep. That's our 4 topics, 4 hosts, varying degrees of NFFC chat. We'll bring more of that throughout the summer, of course. Right. Talking Reds, what have you guys got planned for the summer months before the new season? Anything that would pique our interest whilst the World Cup's going on, for example?
Yeah, we do a series called The One With, where we have different person come in, join us, and we interview them and talk about Forest, talk about them. We've got a couple of those coming up. We've already done a finance episode with Raf, and we're going to be doing some recruitment stuff, some more finance stuff as well. We might dip into some England chat as well and sort of like switch it over to England a little bit and keep an eye on Elliot. And obviously when the transfers start happening, we'll be jumping in and discussing transfer targets and kind of being a little bit spontaneous and so on. But we obviously need to set up a return leg. So we need to have you both come and join us for a tete-a-tete on our pod if you'd be happy to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we will, won't we, Kate?
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so very much looking forward to seeing what content you guys produce over the summer. Love your live stuff, by the way. That's really great. That's something that we're looking to get into perhaps sooner rather than later. But yeah, love the stuff you do. Some great content. And I love that finance episode that you did. That was really well explained. That's the sort of content that is quite unique and niche, and you can't always find that sort of stuff elsewhere. So it was. Is he the random pundit? He is, isn't he?
Yeah, we're lucky because Raf. We're lucky to have Raf. Obviously, comes on our pod to do that. So yeah, we lent into him massively, as you saw. But yeah, he's a bit of a diamond when it comes to that. That's his speciality.
Excellent. Right. Any final thoughts, guys, before we draw to a close?
Nothing from me. Just keep doing what you're doing and keep listening, folks. And I always say on ours, there's a few pods out there all doing their own little bit in their own little corner. And, we just want to talk about Forest, the club we love, and engage with all the pods. Let us know what you think of this one, of our one. And, we'll try and give you the content that you guys want to listen to and watch.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll be more competitive in the podcast prediction league next season as well. So
You're not the only one. I failed miserably at that. I drug everybody down.
Right, that's it from us for another week. Thanks again to Greg and to Richard and to Kate, of course, for joining. We shall be back next week with a very special episode, all being well. In the meantime, thanks everybody for listening or for watching, and we'll talk to you again real soon.